Forum is an initiative driven by the XPGTN batch of XLRI. The forum allows students to interact with industry stalwarts who share valuable insights on their roles and responsibilities, their knowledge about the industry, and the diverse corporate challenges they faced. The forum gives students a wholesome experience by providing the taste of the corporate world along with the incredible exposure and learning experience they get in the classrooms.
So a very good evening to everyone present here. It is my extreme and immense pleasure to welcome on behalf of XLRI EXPGTM a very special speaker. Today we have the honor of receiving Mr. Arjun Vaid, a sixth generation Vaid who inherited the family's 100 India FDA approved medical formulations and 50 trademarks, accumulated over 150 years. After graduating from Brown University and working at LVMH's private equity arm, Mr. Vaid had decided to start an Ayurvedic healthcare company that would combine the family's traditions with cool branding, easy to use products, and online retail channels. The company also offered free Ayurvedic consultations to all its customers. Currently, he is leading the venture investing for Whirl Invest in India and also works as an angel investor and mentor to brands in India's D2C ecosystem. He was the first Ayurvedic entrepreneur to be featured in the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list and Business World 40 Under 40 list. Also, he won the Youth SMB of the Year from Amazon and the Retail Startup Award from the Retailers Association of India. Again, I would like to extend my warm feelings of gratitude and thanks Mr. Vaid for taking out his precious time and joining us today. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to be a part of this conversation.
So Mr. Arjun, there are a lot of Ayurvedic companies in the market. So knowing that, do you consider your startup as a disruptive?
Yeah, I think, look, Ayurveda has been a tradition in India for the last 5,000 plus years, right? And I think the great part about Ayurveda is that it's part of all our lives in some way, shape or form, right? At some point in our lives, all of us have used Ayurvedic products. I think the challenge was that as the British came to India and as they had more of an impact on what we were doing, I think allopathy came to the fore. It became the most important medical science, and Ayurveda went to the back seat and became the poor cousin, right? And with that, Ayurveda then lost a connect with modern consumers, right? So consumers like you didn't have a connect with Ayurveda, and someone who grew up in a family of Ayurveda, someone who grew up with Ayurveda as well, I found this strange, right? I found it strange when I went to the US for my undergrad, and I saw yoga pants, yoga mats, yoga gyms, yoga apparel, and I saw all these Indian things being repackaged and rebranded to appeal to modern consumers. Yoga is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the US. India didn't have much to do with it. Right? It wasn't us who took yoga to the world, and so I thought that there had to be something done with Ayurveda. I moved back from college, worked in private equity, and after my dada passed, I said no. There has to be a way to take our ancient science of Ayurveda and repackage and rebrand to modern consumers. And that is the conception and differentiation with Dr. Vedyas, to be honest, right? That's what really made us different, disruptive. We were the first brand to take Ayurveda online. We were the first brand to offer a free consultation online. And in 4 years, we were able to take Ayurveda to more than 1.5 million households across 16,500 pin codes in India. It takes years for an offline retail brand to do that. And so I think that's the real power of what we built with Dr. Vedyas.
So thank you for the answer, Mr. Arjun. So my follow-up question is that since you have been an active member in India's D2C ecosystem, so how essential is the vision of a founder of a startup, and how does he align their employees to this vision?
Look, I think I've built a startup. I've now made an angel invested in more than 20 companies myself, and I now work as a full-time venture capitalist as well after our exit. I think the first thing that we look at, that any investor would look at when they look at an early stage business or growth stage business, is the founder, right? That's the core identity or ethos of the business. That's where the drive, that's where the passion comes, that's where the vision comes from. But I think the biggest mistake that I made as an early stage founder was you try to do everything yourself, right? You may be a great founder, but you only have a maximum of 16 hours in a day to work, right? You can't do more than that. It's not physically possible. At scale, you can work 20 hours for a couple of days, but you can't work 20 hours for the rest of your life. That's not going to happen. And so it's not possible to do it alone, right? And from that comes the importance of having a team, but an empowered team, right? A team that feels ownership to what they're doing. Because the job of a startup is to do what everybody does in 20 years in 4 years, or what everybody does in 10 years in 3 years, right? And if you don't have a strong leadership group that's able to beat the market, you're not doing anything disruptive then, right? And so I think founders' vision, founders' drive, founders' passion, that's critical. But to take that to the next level or create an organization that hyperscales, right, or blitz scales, I think a strong leadership group is really important. The leadership group that embodies the culture, which then trickles down the organization, right? So, for example, at Dr. Vedya's, Proudly Indian was part of our ethos, right, as a brand. I still wear this band with the Indian flag on my hand at all times. And I think what was really cool was one of our team members, pretty senior team member, he went for his MBA. And after his MBA, I think he ended his MBA sometime around last summer, right? And that's first wave, first lockdown, all of those things, right? And very difficult to get a job at that time. So he started until he found a business to sell cloth masks. And he came to the office in like June or July. And he gave me one of those cloth masks, right? And he said, "Sir, I want to give you one of these cloth masks." Cool part was that cloth mask also said Proudly Indian, right? That's a percolation of culture. So the culture we built at Dr. Vedya's, he went for an MBA, and 2 years later when he started a business, that same culture was part of his business, right? And culture is sort of very important, and it's what is said about you when you're not in the room. And I think from that perspective, that was a great example of how, well, one of the few examples, but a great example of how our culture percolated.
But just jumping in here, Arjun, thank you for that. So just a follow up for that, like how do you like make sure that that culture is living and breathing every day as a founder? Because, you know, a founder's job description is not set in any way, right? It's, you've got to do a bit of everything for till whenever you have to do it. And how do you make sure that, like, what are some of the best practices that maybe you followed in order to kind of make sure that this ethos of yours carried forward? And also there would have been some, I think as you scaled your business, right from maybe, you know, the family business to a business which, you know, served 1.5 million customers, right? As you make that transition, how do you ensure that this stays preserved as well, right? And how do you still get that buy-in from the older employees, and how do you do that?
Look, I think there is a misconception that Dr. Vedya's is a family business. The reality was we didn't have a business. We had a legacy, right? So my dada ran a clinic, so did my great-grandfather. And so I pretty much, after my dada passed, inherited a bunch of formulations, a few team members in a factory which was pretty much not producing anything, right? And we took it from there. So I think I didn't really have to get that many people to buy into my vision, because it pretty much started with a blank slate, right? But how do you make culture percolate, and how does it become a part of the organization? That's a great question, right? So I'll tell you three things that we did, right? The first thing is, look, the founder has to embody the culture. The founder has to live and breathe the culture, right? So I wore Dr. Vedya's t-shirt every day to work. I mean, it was part of who I was, right? And I feel that the founder has to embody what then becomes a part of the organization. If I didn't embody the company's culture, I didn't expect anyone to embody it. Second thing is, make it part of everything, right? So every offer letter, every important place in the office, every large team meeting, every town hall, we talked about this, right? We talked about our 7 philosophies. Honesty is our practice, humbleness our equity, hard work our strength, happy to work, happier to achieve, 100% and nothing less. Team effort is our power, and customers are reason for being. We talked about this all the time, right? I can still remember those 7 philosophies at the back of my hand, right? So I think that's the sort of second and very important thing. And the third thing is, right, hiring decisions, culture was more important than skill set. Because skill set can be taught, culture cannot, right? So if there is a culture mismatch, and we made many mistakes early on, right? If there's a culture mismatch, it's not what should be good for your organization, drop it. So I think these 3 things really helped build a strong culture. And look, we worked pretty much all through the lockdown, right? So we were working in April, May and June of last year when nobody was working. We were working all through that time period. And that's, to get people to come to the office and to the warehouse and pack orders at that time, that's only culture.
Mr. Ved, I will be taking up the next questions. So when you left your job and decided to went back to your family business, so what were the major challenges that you faced in upscaling the business and under your leadership?
Yeah, look, I think I was in private equity, right? And that's the finance world where everybody answers your emails and everybody's sort of good on timelines and everybody comes with a very high level of education and all those things. And to come from that to a startup, there's very few skills that I could take other than analytical skills, financial modeling skills, which honestly in the early stage of the startup don't help you as much, right? So I think unlearning everything I'd learned and starting from scratch, accepting that an email is not going to solve for the problem and I have to make a phone call or a WhatsApp and an SMS and an Instagram DM. However, at Dr. Vaidya's, one of the principles all our team knew was, I have sent an email is not good enough. You've got to try to reach the person on email, SMS, WhatsApp, call, LinkedIn, Facebook, however you can to reach that person before you give up, right? On whatever you're trying to do. So I think that was a big challenge. The second thing, which is a big challenge, was like you basically start from zero, right? And you're nobody. Like nobody cares what your previous job was, which college you went to. You're basically nobody, right? And in an industry like Ayurveda, where there are already many somebodies, right? Dabur, Emami, Patanjali, Baidyanath, Himalayas, Zandu. How do you stand on your own 2 feet is really difficult. And building your brand recall, your brand trust, and getting customers to buy a product, I think that was the real big challenge. It took us time. Right? You have to be patient. It took us time, but eventually we got there.
Thank you, sir. So my follow-up question would be, Dr. There has been a huge transition to omni-channels under your leadership. So what changes you brought in the company during your time?
You know, as I said, this company, there was no company when I started, right? My dada had a clinic and I inherited formulations and a legacy. I pretty much didn't make any changes. I started everything from zero, from branding, packaging, e-commerce, website, brand story, all of that we did from scratch. So I think that it wouldn't be right to say there were changes, because my grandfather ran a clinic and we ran a products business or FMCG business or a D2C business. And so that was totally different. What we were fortunate to have was a legacy. We had a name, we had formulations, we had IP, we had all of those things. But I think to say that I made changes in my family business would not be correct.
Okay. So in terms of supply chain and logistics part, how were you able to manage those things, like scaling up?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty general question, but let me try to answer it with some amount of detail. So look, I think supply chain, it's critical in Ayurvedic products to get the highest quality of ingredients, and we are fortunate to have some of those suppliers and those relationships in place and sort of leverage on the relationships from my grandfather's time and scale them. Logistics is the most important part of an e-commerce business, right? To manage your warehouse, your supply chain coming into your factory movement to your warehouse to your end customers, managing CODs, returns, RTOs, TAT, because today's e-commerce customer is much different from 5 years ago. The customer expects the order within 3 days in a metro and within 4 or 5 days in a tier 2, tier 3 city. If you're not meeting that timeline, you're getting the order returned or you're getting a complaint, right? So building a robust infrastructure to understand what the TAT should be, what happens when an order breaches the TAT or the SLA, what level of service you need to offer customers to make a high NPS and an amazing brand experience to get retention and repeat. I think that was a great learning experience for us. And we worked in the earlier stages of e-commerce, right? 2017, 2018, when plug and play solutions weren't available. Today, a lot of my angel investments are in enablers to e-commerce, companies that support the e-commerce ecosystem. In my time, there were very few of these, right? And so I think to be able to build this ourselves was a great learning for us, because once you build it yourself, even though you get other people to do it for you or help you or enable you, nobody can cheat you. And I think that was the cool part of building logistics, CRM, supply chain, operations. We see the back end of e-commerce ourselves, and my wife and I were able to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Vaidya, just a follow-up question on this. So, since you said that you started this entire venture from scratch, so just what inspired you to leave your private equity job and come back to family business and start something very, very on its own?
Hey, look, I grew up with juvenile bronchitis. I suffered from asthma growing up. At age 2, I grew up with pumps, nebulizers, inhalers, steroids. I was stopped from playing cricket by my grandfather because there was too much dust on the cricket field. So asthma really sort of affected my childhood. I didn't have Coca-Cola or ice cream till I was like 13 years old, right? And 14 years of Ayurvedic treatment later, my dada cured me of asthma, and I was able to start playing cricket again, and I became the captain of my school cricket team. For me, that was a big deal. And so I made a promise to my grandfather at some point that I'll do something with this legacy and I'll take it forward. Spent a lot of time with him growing up, learning about Ayurveda, transcribing the family formulations from the scriptures to the computer. And so when he passed, I thought it was my duty to take it forward. Like if it didn't go forward with me, it would have died, right? Our family's Ayurveda legacy. And I think his nurse of 17 years once told me that. She said, you talk about what your father's done. My father built a pretty successful business, and that's our family business in the luxury jewelry and watch space. And she said, you talk about what your father does, but what about what your grandfather's done? And are you going to let his legacy die? And for me, that was the moment when I said, look, at my age of 24 and a half, like I'm not going to lose anything by giving this a shot. And if I don't do it, I'll regret all my life.
That's really motivating, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Vaidya. So we had a couple of questions even related to investment, because you've also been on the other side of the table, right? You've been on both sides of the table essentially. So maybe we just wanted to understand when an investment firm kind of do they approach startups, or is it the other way around? And what is the process of this scouting, and how do you assess a company? Because one factor you talked about is the founder, right? Like you do assess the founder, the vision. Like how else do you assess a company or a startup before deciding to invest in them?
Oh, look, I think I'm not old school about this, right? If I like a company and like what they're doing, I don't mind reaching out to them if I want to invest. And vice versa, I have no issues with the founder reaching out to me. So I think those days of only investors should reach out to founder, or you can only reach an investor through a connection, I don't believe in that. If you're doing something good and you want to connect with me, go ahead. Like, be my guest, connect with me, and I will reach out to you. Maybe I won't get to talk to you that week, but by the next week, I'll find some time to speak with you, right? And that's my mantra. So I think I'm not old school like that. I mean, I've met some of the coolest people who've just cold called me, and I've met some of the most influential people in my life from a cold call, right? From just like, hey, I want to talk to you. So I think that's how I look at that. Three things I look at when making an investment. The first is founder, which I've talked about. The second is addressable market, because in an early stage startup, I think you have to that has to signal. And so Ayurveda, for example, very large market, not a sort of very small market. And so at least in consumer products, you look for the addressable market. And when I mean addressable market, I mean that though I am gluten-free and sugar-free, I will not invest in a gluten-free, sugar-free product, because I don't think the addressable market in India is large enough for that specific product, right? And the last thing is growth velocity. Do you see that founder exhibiting a really high growth velocity, or do you see the founder able to exhibit the growth velocity to do what, as I said earlier, other people will do in 10 years, in 3 years, or in 20 years, in 5 years, right? That's the three things I look at when making an investment.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for that. Also, from your perspective, do you see maturity of a certain startup as a key factor to decide and invest in it?
No, I think that's too generalized. I've invested in startups from seed to Series A from my personal capacity, and will invest in Series A from the fund as well. I think it's idea to idea. It can't be generalized.
Okay, sure. Also because your expertise is also in the D2C ecosystem, what do you see as some of the upcoming trends and opportunities that are there in the Indian startup space within the D2C sector?
Look, I think D2C is hot right now, and I'm so excited to see where D2C is. Like this week, I was on CNBC talking on D2C on a show that was only about D2C on CNBC, right? That's how hot D2C is right now. I think it's great because brands are being built in super unique categories, and people are being able to have small setups outside the top 10 cities and get serious sales, like 100 crore, 50 crore per annum type sales, just through D2C without a big infrastructure of distribution. And that's why I do a podcast on D2C as well, showing that like really you can build something of serious scale, not just like hobby business, serious scale using the power of online. What trends do I see? I think competition has increased significantly. So performance marketing only will not cut it for you. You have to build a really strong brand. When I was building D2C, we had to solve for you buying online. And if you bought online, you bought only Dr. Vedas because there's nobody else selling. Today, you're online, you're shopping, but you have 10 options. So why do they choose Dr. Vedas out of the 10 options? That's the paradigm to be solved for. So it's a much competitive landscape. I think I still see some white spaces like home and kitchen and pets where there aren't as many brands. But like if you look at beauty, personal care, and health and wellness, the spaces I was closest to, I think they're very competitive now. So you have to really, really work hard to build your differentiation and your moat to get customers to be sticky to you.
Okay. I had a question about this, like maybe even related to maybe right from the first question, right? Like when we were talking about D2C and we were talking about Ayurveda markets also, something that just came to my mind is that you did talk about maybe my feeling is that maybe this is a bit about the urban consumer, but what about the rural consumers? Do you see them also shifting into a D2C model? And do you see these D2C companies staying D2C? This is another question, right? Like, because once you get acquired, once you gradually start scaling, does that, still become a viable model anymore?
Look, I think rural is a far stretch, right, for D2C. But I think urban is a very large definition, right? And so 82% of Dr. Vedas orders came from outside the top 10 cities, right? So that could be tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. I think there is enough D2C happening there, right? There are enough platforms like Trell doing an amazing job monetizing these audiences and getting these audiences to shop. And this audience wants to shop, but Amazon may not be the easiest way for them to shop. And so social commerce, video commerce, live commerce, community commerce, all of these things are coming out now and have serious adoption rates as well. Rural, I don't know yet. I think there will be a different experience needed to engage a rural customer, but I think that just urban is sort of not the only port of call now. And there are brands like us that exhibited that outside of the top 10 cities, there's serious business to be done. I think the omni-channel question was the one you asked next, like when does a brand go offline? My sense is there's no right answer for this and it's category dependent or product type dependent. But the great part about a D2C brand going offline is once you reach 50, 100 crores per annum of ARR, right, of annual run rate, so you cross like 5, 6, 7 crores a month. When you go to an offline store, you negotiate terms, you dictate terms because they want you more than you want them. When you go as a new brand with 5, 10 lakh rupees in sales at upstart, you pay a listing fee, you pay a marketing fee, you pay really hefty margins, you get paid only when your product sells, you sort of accept SOR type terms. But when your brand is established, you're able to command terms in retail. And I think that's the real power of an omnichannel strategy. And we're seeing D2C brands do it. I didn't do it. I think we were online only until I ran the business, until I exited the business. But you're seeing enough D2C brands now who reach enough scale to command terms offline. And that's a great thing. Awesome, guys. Anything else?
I had one last question. I mean, I had a question regarding something else that I was going through your LinkedIn profile and I had noticed that you were an advisor for Just for Cakes. It so happens to be the organization I also worked for. Like I worked for Enabling Leadership, Music Basti, and you were the advisor for fundraising and everything. So, and you also consistently dealt with other nonprofits as well, right? So I also just wanted to understand what motivates you personally to take up such roles and how do they help, in your everyday life?
Look, I'm a huge sports fan, like a huge sports fan, right? So when it comes to service for me and my wife, it is sports, right? Because we believe that can teach a lot of skills which we won't be able to learn anywhere else, right? And I learned, while I was never good at sports, I learned a lot of my discipline, I learned a lot of my teamwork, I learned a lot of my perseverance, great resilience, all from sport. So for us, it was the first port of call that we went to. Story with Just for Cakes is very interesting. Actually, I had a friend from Brown who was the teacher in Teach for India, and Just for Cakes started inside Teach for India first. And she said, "Will you come and train my school kids?" And so my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, me and 2 other friends went and started training them. And then we said, "This is amazing. Like, can this be blown up, right?" And so at that time, Just for Cakes was just starting. So we spent some time with Neha and Vikas and help them think through sort of fundraising, strategy, how to get teams to be owned by individuals, corporates, or groups of individuals. Like my dream was always to own a sports team. I can't go and buy Mumbai Indians, or at least now I can't, right? That's my favorite team. I can't go and buy Manchester United. Can I own my own little Manchester United, right? And that's something really cool that we were able to sort of do just for kicks. I loved my experience with JFK. I thought it was exceptional learning for me. My wife took the girls team to the semi-finals of the Bombay League. So I think that was a big achievement for us. I think the boys team did do so well. Look, I'm a big fan of sport. I spend a lot of time playing sport, watching sport, and also donating to sport, because I think that I'm a huge cricket fan, but I think that we have so much talent in this country, and all of that talent needs to be leveraged. So we're going to be doing a pretty interesting donation in relation to the Olympics, and you guys will hear about it soon. But yeah, I think we're big fans of sports, and so this personally motivates us a lot.
Thank you for taking that, Mr. Vaidya. It's been an insightful session overall. If there are no follow-up questions or anything, I'll just hand it over to Tarun for a vote of thanks.
So on behalf of Accelerate XPGDM Batch 2021-2022, I would like to sincerely thank you for taking out your valuable time and joining us here to deliver and share your careerful insights. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for taking out your time, sir. Thank you.
Bye.